Alright, hello everyone, Adrenaluke here, and tomorrow is going to be a special day. As you can see, the Road to GT7 series starts tomorrow, and this is going to be the last championship series ever on Gran Turismo Sport. We're in the end game now. Gran Turismo 7 is right around the corner to be released, so this is it, guys. This is the last championship event. And the first round, or the first race of this series, is going to be at Tokyo Expressway, South Inner Loop. It is a N300 category group car, which you can pick from your garage cars. And it seems that everyone is really going, well, not literally everyone, but the majority of people are migrating to the Ford GT40 for this event. It is a 10-lap race. Tire wear and fuel consumption will be on. But the most major thing about this race is that tuning is permitted. And so with that, you can get a colossal advantage of setting up a proper tune. And due to the fact that I've had several messages of people asking for guidance because they're struggling to set up a tune, and not everyone really knows how to set up a proper tune, I felt that it's appropriate to just make this video and kind of explain in the best way how to properly tune your car and for the right track. Just to help out people, I'm going to explain it in a way that even if you know nothing about tuning, that this will hopefully give you a big help in understanding how to properly tune your car, even if you don't have much understanding of it. So let's get into this, okay? So like I said, people are choosing the Ford GT40 here, so I think the first thing you want to do before you touch anything in the tuning is you want to take the car and the default settings, not touch anything, and just test it out on the specific track that you want to tune it for, and just notice certain things about how the car is handling, how the car is behaving, where it can improve, where its weaknesses are, and also notice what kind of nature of track is it, okay? You got to get familiar with the track as well. Does the track have really tight chicanes? Does the track have areas where you're going over bumpy curbs? Does the track have very long straights, or is the track more in short straights and you're taking a lot of turns? Does the track have really long delayed apexes, or does the track have really tight turns? Notice all the different things about the track, because that's going to vary a lot, as well as the more obvious place where every vehicle in this game, every car, is going to require a much different tune regardless of the track. And so even if you're picking a different car for a certain track, you still want to tune that car a lot differently than you would a different car for the same track even. And so tuning does go very in depth, and I know it can be very intimidating, but that's why I'm making this video, to try to help make this more simple to understand. And so going into the car settings here is where you have the menu to tune your car. You can see I titled this setting sheet here Tokyo South Inner, and so this is the tune I set up for that specific track. Now, traction control is something, traction control and brake bias are two things that you can change on the fly during the race, but you can also change it beforehand in this tuning sheet here. I would recommend that traction control, you almost always have it set to 0, with a few exceptions depending on which vehicle and track conditions, if it's raining and so forth. But I would highly recommend, especially for this car and this track of what the first Road to GT7 series is going to be held at tomorrow, I would highly recommend that you put traction control at 0. This is going to take some practice to get good at, and I understand that not all of you are going to have the skills to be able to handle the car correctly without traction control, but when you do, you're going to be a lot more deadly on the track. But what's really going to make you a lot more deadly is going to have the proper tune. So going down the board here, like I said, traction control, just put that on 0. That's simple, get that out of the way. But okay, brake bias. What is brake bias? Well, that means you're going to have a higher percentage of brake pressure applied to one side, whether it's the front wheels or the rear wheels, more than the other. So when you have the brake bias set to 0, there's 50% brake pressure applied to both the rear and front wheels, okay? The reason why you might want to adjust this is if you want, let's say, more rotation, or if you want to do more, if you're going to do more trail braking, stuff like that. So overall, since this is a mid-engine displacement of the engine, you want to have the brake bias towards the rear. Now, if tire wear was not on in this race, I would even set it at a -2 or a -3. The negatives is going to put the brake bias more towards the front. And so, since tire wear is on, I barely adjusted it to a -1 because tire wear is going to be at play here, and brake bias is going to influence tire wear even further, because when you have the brakes having more pressure applied towards the front wheels, that also means more heat is going to be generated towards the front wheels now, because more brake pressure is being applied there. So the front wheels now are going to wear out faster, and I would say that even if the brake bias was not touched and it was just let at 0, almost every race you're going to have the front wheels wear out faster because they're actually turning on the axle, and so that's more friction across the track surface, where the rear tires are just staying put. And so the majority of the time you're going to have more wear in the front, and you really would ideally would want less wear in the front in the first place. And so I just have it set to a -1 because of tire wear being on. Okay, moving on. Well, a couple more things actually I want to mention on brake bias is that if you're, depending on the nature of the track that you're going to be racing at, if you're doing mostly just straight line braking, then you could have it either in the middle or a little bit more of a positive brake bias. And this again depends on where the engine is. Mid-engine cars, you rarely ever want to go in the positive brake bias on a mid-engine, unless if it's a Porsche. I found that the Porsches can benefit from that. But if you're doing straight line braking, more rotation is going to be more beneficial overall. So the higher value of brake bias, the more it is towards the rear, you're going to have more rotation. Putting a brake bias towards the front is going to eliminate more rotation, but it's going to make it easier to stay stable, okay? And with a mid-engine car, having it more in the front is going to make it better to where you can still stay stable, and the back end is not going to swing out as much. So moving on to suspension tuning. Okay, so ride height. This is a track where you're not going over many curbs at all. So since you're not going over any curbs that's going to be big bumps on the track, you don't have to worry about making the ride height too low, to where if you had a really low ride height on a track, like let's say the chicanes in Monza, going over those bumps and curbs on the chicane in Monza are going to be deadly to a very low ride height. So, you know, if you're going there, you might want to consider that. However, this track does not have those curbs you have to worry about, so I have the ride height set to really low. Why do you want to do that? Because let's say my hand right here is the wheels, right? And my hand right here is the body of the vehicle, okay? And in between that's going to be the suspension springs. If you have lower springs or higher springs, let's say it's high up like this, right? When you're turning really sharp, that's going to create this amount of play to where there's body roll. The weight is going to be shifting of the vehicle. When it's way up here, see how the pendulum of the swing of the pendulum is a lot greater. And then when you have it closer to the wheels and it's really low, notice how there the pendulum doesn't have as much room to swing now. So when you have the ride height lower, the center of gravity is going to stay closer to the center throughout the whole corner, okay? And so I found that it really benefits to have the ride height very low here. I have it set to a 283 in the front and a 287 in the rear. This is a very low ride height, okay? Moving on, natural frequency. I have this very stiff on this. Now, frequency is basically how stiff or how soft the actual suspension is. You're not influencing the height of the vehicle here, but you're influencing the overall stiffness or softness. So you don't want to make it too much in one direction. If you make it too stiff, the car will understeer too much. If you make it too soft, the car might oversteer, or it might have too much body roll. So the trick is that you want to get it tight enough and stiff enough to where it's just at that sweet spot to where you're not getting too much understeer, but you're also not having it too soft to where it's going to struggle with oversteer and body roll. So I have this set to 266 in the front and 261 in the rear. Again, You're not going over any curbs or bumps that will have to make you worry about this being too stiff here. Much like ride height, if you're in a track where you do have to have certain wheels go over curbs, you want to have the ride, the frequency a lot less of a value, okay? Lowering the frequency will help you go over curbs with more ease, but you don't have to worry about that in this track, so that's why I have it set to 266 and 261. Moving on to anti-roll bars. I have this set to 9 and 9. I have this at an even value, but overall I have this a lot stiffer than what the default tune was set to. So what anti-roll bars do? Anti-roll bars essentially try to eliminate body roll. I know I've mentioned body roll several times here. It's a constant theme throughout suspension tuning. Well, anti-roll bars are going to play the biggest part in this. So if you have the anti-roll bars too stiff for your certain vehicle, then it's going to significantly understeer. Now on this GT40, since it is a very old vehicle, it's not like modern race cars, and so I really benefited on making the anti-roll bars a lot stiffer here. Now, if you wanted a car to oversteer more, then if you want more rotation, more oversteer, you would make the rear stiffer. If you wanted the car to understeer, then you would make the front stiffer. So having like a 10-9 would make a better understeer, or having a 9-8 would make better understeer. It just depends on how overall you want the car to be stiff, while also balancing if you want more understeer or oversteer. So on the contrary, if you wanted the car to oversteer more, then you could have a 9-10 here or a 8-9. Okay, but I just have it set to 9-9. So that overall makes it so that there's a lot of body roll eliminated, which was a major problem that when I tested the car on the track, I noticed. Again, like I mentioned earlier, guys, you want to really test the car on the track to notice what things can be improved a lot. And so I had a really good feeling going into tuning on what needs to be improved before I started manipulating these values, okay? And so now moving on to the compression and rebound ratio percentages. What this means is this is how fast or how slow when the springs are shocked. Let's say you go over a curb, right? The springs are going to compress and rebound like this. And even on the smallest little bumps on the track when you're going a straight line, they're constantly going to be, compressing and rebounding, but they're really going to be compressing and rebounding when you have it under shock, which means either going over a curb or, unfortunately, having a collision with another vehicle, even if it's a minor one. So, again, given the fact that you're not going over many curbs in this track, you don't need that to be of a very high value, but I really didn't want to gamble and set this to a really low value and have it really quick rebounding compressions, because there is a chance that you might be in a collision with another vehicle. So I kept the front exactly where it's at, and I made the rear just slightly reduced. Now, if you're in a track, again, where you're going over curbs, you want to really make these a lot higher, but you always want to have the front just one value higher than the rear, okay? So moving on, negative camber angle. This is going to be probably the most complicated thing to explain. It's going to be the most complicated thing to master. To be honest with you guys, I haven't even mastered this part yet. I'm going to grab a pin here to better explain this. So imagine that this pin is a pencil with a rubber eraser. So imagine this part here is a rubber eraser, and this is like one of those wooden number 2 pencils, right? So there's something called tire flex that happens when you're cornering really fast. So let's say that I take this pencil. Again, imagine it's a pencil, and there's a rubber eraser here, right? Let's say that there's a desk here, and I push downwards into the side against the desk really hard. What's going to happen when I'm pushing this way diagonally with the pencil? Well, that rubber eraser is going to flex and bend the opposite direction, okay? Like the rubber eraser is going to bend and flex that way, the opposite way that you're pushing. Well, the same thing happens in your car, okay? So when you're, let's say, taking a very tight right turn, what's going to happen is that the center of gravity is going to shift to the opposite side of the tight turn you're making. So you're turning really tight to the right. Well, the center of gravity is now shifting to the left. And that means the weight of the car is going to be shifting to the left. And that's going to mean that when the weight's going that way and there's a push in this direction, when you're turning right, the tire surface is also going to flex and bend towards the right side. And that's something that can really negatively impact, it's going to hurt your cornering. And so if you just have this set to 0 and 0, your tires are going to be at a flat angle to where when you're driving in a straight line, you're going to have the most grip because the tires are having the most surface area on the track when you're going straight. But then, if you have no camber at all, when you're turning, that tire flex is going to cause you to be at a very big disadvantage while cornering. So this is very hard to get just right. It's a lot of just theory and just trial and error. And it's very difficult to know if it's not something you can notice as easily as like body roll to adjust for that, or oversteer and understeer. This is something that's very hard to get just right. So just know that this isn't very easy. This is probably the hardest part of tuning, okay? So overall, I would say that if you're in a track that does not have very much straight line driving and a lot of twists and turns and very sharp turns, you want to have more negative camber angle, okay? That's going to have you at an advantage where you have more tire surface making contact even during the tire flex that occurs, okay, while cornering really hard. And if you're at a track where you're doing a lot of very straight line driving, like Monza for instance, you don't want a lot of camber angle then, okay? And so there you'd have it a lot closer to 0 on both values. But on this track, I noticed that there is there isn't as much straight line driving, but the turns you're making are not super sharp. So I do have a bit more camber though from the default tune. So I have it set to 1.0 on the front and 1.5 on the rear. And now moving on, toe angle. This basically means the toe, let's say this is the angle of the tires, right? If you have a toe in, it's moving it further inwards, okay? If you have a toe out, it's moving it further outwards. It's doing this to the tires, okay? It's changing the angle inwards or outwards in this fashion. So it's not like camber where you're, okay, so camber, let's say it's like this is a track surface and the tire's going this way, right? That's like vertical adjustments, but this is more like, you can see the diagram, the drawing on the right there. Look at the top right of the screen and see how camber is doing this, as you can see the diagram illustrating. And then you can see the angle, what is manipulating there on the top right of the screen there, how it differs. So toe angle, why do you want to change that? Well, let's say, I'll tell you right now, the rear tire toe angle is going to be the most important value that you want to influence, and that's because if you have a higher in angle of the toe of the rear tires, that's going to help you have more stability on the exit of a tight corner, okay? So when you're exiting a tight corner, having the rear tires angled inwards is going to make you to where you're not going to have the rear swinging around or fishtailing or oversteering when you're exiting a tight turn. Now, I didn't struggle with that much of all of me testing the default tune on this vehicle, and so I lowered that tremendously to where I only have a N value of 0.10 or 0.10 on the rear tires, and I left the front toe exactly straight at 0.0. You rarely want to change the toe angle of the front tires. You normally want to change the toe angle of the rear tires. However, if you wanted a little bit more rotation and you wanted a little bit more direction towards oversteer and the car was locking up too much during turns, you can move the toe angle towards the out. So out 0.15 or out 0.10 on the front if you needed that. Or the opposite, if you're having too much oversteer, then you could move the toe angle in the front towards the end, okay? But again, on the rear tires, on the rear, you only want to have it, I would never do out on the rear. I would only make it go either more towards the center on the N, or more towards, you can have it a higher value of N or a lower value of N, depending on how much stability you want on the exit of a sharp turn. And that just comes through testing out the vehicle. So again, here I just have 0.0 on the front toe angle and 0.10 N on the rear. Moving on, aerodynamics. It does not let you tune that on this vehicle, so I've left that how it is since it just grays it out, and you can't change those values. Now, moving on to the differential gear. What this does, okay, so both the initial torque and the acceleration, what that does is that while you are engaging the throttle, that is going to try to eliminate how much a car slips. The higher the values are, the more it engages that differential gear, to where if you're hitting the throttle really hard, you're going to almost be able to just only drive the car in a straight line on the throttle then if these values are very high. That can come in handy in certain vehicles where you can struggle to keep it under control under throttle, but in this case, it just felt like I could loosen the car up a little bit more while on throttle, so I changed the initial torque and acceleration sensitivity both down to a 6 on the torque and a 5 on the sensitivity. And so that makes it to where when I'm on the throttle, I can still be turning the vehicle and still not lose control, okay? This vehicle does not require very high values of the differential engagement. And the same thing with the braking. What the braking sensitivity does on the differential is that while you have the brakes engaged, if you have a higher value there, it will try to eliminate slippage while you are braking. Now again, I really don't think that's very necessary on this car, and so I dropped that down to a 9. And one of the major flaws that you can have of having the braking sensitivity too high when it's not necessary is that you might not be slipping much when you're braking, but then if the value is too high, when you actually start to turn, you won't be able to make the turn then. It will be eliminating so much slippage where you will understeer. So, I mean, across the board here, especially on the torque and sensitivity for the throttle, one of the biggest problems people have while tuning that they can't really figure out why, when they're having the throttle punched, they need to keep releasing the throttle to actually turn, and it feels like the car's just going in a straight line on throttle and it just locks out and they can't turn. You need to adjust the differential, guys. This is a very secret weapon, and if you master this part and you are able to tune the differential, you are going to be a deadly weapon on the track, okay? Moving on to transmission. Hands down, the place that needed tuning the absolute most on this vehicle, okay? The gear ratio going into it on the default tune had the gears lasting way too long. It took forever for me to have to redline to shift up to the higher gear there. And so I had to adjust this to make the gears a lot shorter, because there's even portions on the track that you'll see later on when I show a before and after of me doing laps of before I touch a tune and then after I modify the tune. You'll see on the before video that I do that I'm struggling to even get past third gear on a lot of portions of the track, or even struggling to get past second gear on some portions, and that's bad because I'm not able to take advantage of, you know, a lot of the gear, the drivetrain here, and so I've had to overall shorten the final gear ratio to a 3.110, and then after that I went and changed the individual gear ratios, and you will notice that where you tweak the individual gear ratios will help you achieve red line on a certain gear right before you have to then slow down before a turn, okay? Because you don't want to get to the point where you have to shift up right before you're turning in. So you'll see in the after replay that I'll show, where I'm doing the lap with my custom tune, that the fifth gear and third gear especially are going to max out right before I turn into certain areas, and that's where individual gear tweaking can come in handy, especially if let's say in certain vehicles, didn't really notice it in this one, but in certain vehicles first and second gear can have way too much torque, so on the low end torque you can make those gears longer instead of shorter, and if you wanted, you know, to make certain gears shorter or certain gears longer, individual gear tweaking can really come in handy. So enough talk about that. here's what I had set for this car that I felt is the ultimate settings after I did so much trial and error and coming back and keep adjusting it and testing it, adjusting it and testing it. I have it at the first gear being set to 2.726, second gear 1.989, third gear 1.551, fourth gear 1.252, fifth gear 1.043, and the final gear ratio being 3.110. And that is the full tune of this vehicle that I have put together, and I am very proud of what I have done, and I feel like this is a very good setup to maneuver around this track and in this specific vehicle. And I'm going to show you guys in action how much of a difference this made right up here, where I show a before and after video of this tune, and that's going to play right now. Okay, so I went ahead and jumped into a practice session just to demonstrate to you guys just how powerful setting up a proper tune can be. And this is going to be comparing a before and after. And right here I have the default tune loaded. And so this is how the car is straight out of the box, so to speak. I haven't touched any single aspect of the car. And so you can already notice just how bad the drivetrain is. The gears are just way too long, and it's taking forever for me to get to the red line to shift up on every single gear. You can see at the end of this straight, I barely get past third gear even. I'm approaching the braking zone right up here almost, and I'm redlining on third, and so I never even got past third gear. And so that's a major flaw. And you can notice too on this section, there's too much body roll. Even at the low speeds I'm going in, with it not being able to accelerate as fast, there's still a tremendous amount of body roll, forcing me to not apply much throttle even with how long the gears are. And again up here, I couldn't get past second gear. There's too much body roll at play to where too much weight was pushing to the left of the car, which makes me struggle to stay tight on the apex there, and I had to let off the throttle too much to make it and stay on a right driving line. Especially in these S-curves right here, you can see how much I'm struggling to to regain the center of gravity in the middle of the car. And so this section here can really benefit from less body roll. I almost nipped the wall there even, as the body roll is shifting my car all over the place in those S-curves. I wasn't going fast enough on the straightaway either because of just how bad the gear ratio is. And so even on the exit here, I'm suffering to have a fast exit. And so a lot of these things, you can just notice that it can really benefit from a proper tune. And again, coming up here, you can see I'm still in second gear. I didn't even have to downshift in the beginning of this turn. I'm starting that turn way too much in the inside early on because I shifted with the weight way too far. I'm just not able to take this track as fast as I ideally could, and so there's a lot of things that could be tweaked. And so you're going to see here I'm approaching the finish line, and the time I'm going to get is going to be a 2:18.648. So moving on now, I have now loaded in the ghost of the session of me having the default tune. So the ghost I have in this session is not from the custom tune, but the ghost is of the default tune. And this will better help represent visually how much of an improvement my custom tune has made. So now I have my custom tune loaded in. You can right off the bat just see how much of an improvement the gear ratios are. As I'm flying through the gears now, I was able to make it to fifth gear before I had to slow down for that turn right there. And there's so little body roll that I can have the confidence to apply a lot of throttle, knowing that the car is not going to slide towards one area. And so I can have a lot of control over the car now, and it's going tremendously faster. Notice how it's redlining in fifth gear here, well, almost redlining in fifth gear right before the end of that straight. I wanted to have just a tiny bit of play still left on fifth gear, just because if I enter in the race, I want to have just a little bit of room for slipstream, so I can get a slipstream boost still. And notice how just before I have to turn in on this section up here, I just run out of room on third gear, so it's getting the full power of third gear before I have to slow down for this turn. And there was such little body roll that I was able to hug the apex very tight and then punch the throttle very hard on the exit. And you can see just how much I'm pulling away from the Ghost already. And especially it's going to come to shine through these S-curves. I'm not having much struggle whatsoever to have the center of gravity recenter in the middle of the car, which helps me go through these S-curves very, very fast. And now, approaching this hairpin here, I was going so much faster I had to brake a little bit earlier. That just shows how much of a speed increase there is. And on the exit of this turn, you can see how much I'm still able to turn in while accelerating out of it, instead of having to just, you know, apply partial throttle. I could go full throttle on the whole exit there. And now coming up to these curves again, you can see how much faster I'm able to go through these twists and turns. With the body roll being a lot reduced, I don't have to worry as much about the weight shifting to one side and shoving the car the opposite direction and where I want it to go. And so the exit is not going to suffer here either, and I'm going to be way ahead of the Ghost of my previous session, and I'm going to cross the line with a 2:16.717. So that's it for this video, guys. Race fast, race clean, and I'll see you all in the next video.